Okay, it's day 124. This is part two. And one of the things about people ask me and they say, well, do you ever get depressed? You're so far out ahead of the news and you have to wait for validation. And then when it comes, you don't get credit for it and everyone else takes credit. And that doesn't actually bother me. What's really great is if you're way out in front of a story, you can reuse it a year later, and it's still every bit as valid as a year later. The only thing that comes in that year in between is validation, validation, validation. So I'll give you an example where I went to Montreal and I was talking about the CIA's history with McGill University and all the CIA experiments. I talked about Frank Olson there. I actually went to the nasty tower there, trying to block my face out whenever I can now. And just talked about how that kind of led to this guy named Khalid Awan and the invasion, the similar sort of invasion that we had with bringing Russians in and maybe Nazis after World War II, and kind of and used Canada as a jumping off point to then come into the United States, sort of a insurgency platform, was the same sort of thing that we did with just 30 years later with the Pakistani ISI-111. And I was with a filmmaker up there, and she had some experience with this directly and been to Pakistan and really reported on it firsthand and talked about the ways of infiltrating into the U.S. through film schools and so forth. So it was really a great use of going to Canada and actually experiencing this. And I just, meeting the filmmaker and having this up close and personal story really hammered it home how this infiltration was happening. And it's mainly through drugs. It was mainly through drugs. I talked about EpiPen Jr. and so forth in this company called Mylan. And of course, everyone knows Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, his daughter is the CEO of Mylan. So it's one of those kind of, I don't know, it's kind of pretty close to home. I mean, the pay-to-play possibilities there are pretty strong. Well, everyone remembers maybe this Martin Shkreli, and he's the person everyone loves to hate for tripling or quadrupling or making this actually go up 600% or something for the EpiPen. And Mylan is known for this kind of EpiPen public relations disaster. But what I ask, is it really a disaster or is it really a throw? You focus on the EpiPen, and while you're focusing on the EpiPen, you don't realize that here's Mylan's products, A through Z. Okay, there is a ton of products. Now, I'm not saying they're buying these from Vero Pharmaceutical or Pakistani pharmaceuticals or Indian companies that are pharmaceuticals or Canadian pharmaceuticals, but there are just a ton of drugs, a lot of generics that are covered here. And while you're worried about EpiPen, look at all the other drugs they're selling. Okay, now is Joe Manchin's daughter, hot on the heels of every one of these drugs, getting it approved and so forth? I don't think so. With this many drugs, it looks like they're kind of rubber stamping. How many pass-throughs? This is almost a pass-through for branding, it looks like, to me. It doesn't look like, oh, these are the ones that, are branded drugs here. We're really doing great things. And I'm sure that's where she spends most of her time. But this is the perfect partner, and this is why I talked so much about Gulan and this infiltration strategy here. It wasn't just doctors, wasn't just bringing doctors. The day before I covered doctors and pain clinics. It's also bringing the drugs in from Pakistan, India, and also Russia. And maybe also China, who knows? With this kind of line card here, you could have, basically a funnel for all the world's generics, and basically all you're doing is putting an FBI West Virginia stamp on it and saying we want to make our 20%, and away you go. So I'll just leave that. It's just a point in time, but one day this story will break about how this story isn't really about EpiPen. It's really about all the other drugs that they're rebadging. We're going to find out about Joe Rago. We're going to find out about Vero Pharmaceutical. Now, everyone knows that Vero Pharma was bought by Abbott Labs, but I still think that you're going to find some Vero Pharmaceuticals generics, as well as some Chinese generics, some Indian generics, and some Pakistani generics in this very long list of generics.